Really excited about the session today. We've got a couple of amazing subject matter experts on one of the biggest areas of complexity and spend associated with procurement. And before we get too far down the road, I just want to make sure our restreaming is on. Make sure that we are live on LinkedIn, because we get tons of content from that. And we also get a lot of feedback from that. So just give me 2 seconds. I'll do a little bit more housekeeping. Wow, lots of people jumping in. I'm really excited. Okay, so let's just verify that we are on LinkedIn Live. Tina, are we on LinkedIn
We
Live?
are, yes, we are.
Great. Tina's in the background as always in the control center. So let me first, from a housekeeping perspective, apologize for the camera angle at which you're all watching me at. This is not the one that I would prefer. However, I had a small computer meltdown this weekend, and I am rebuilding a new Microsoft Surface, and somehow I'm having camera issues. So today you're getting me at the angle that you're not supposed to take photos at. So just bear with me. I apologize. So you all know the drill on this. We're running a Zoom meeting. We've got a live studio audience inside of the Zoom meeting. We are inside of the Zoom meeting. If you have questions, please say hello, jump into the chat. Let's talk a little bit about where you're from, a little bit about what your responsibilities are inside of the chat. If you have questions, please use the active Q&A. It's at the bottom of your screen. Inevitably, somebody asks the questions inside of chat, which is fine. I will monitor chat as well. And also, just for all you out on the internet, we are restreaming this live out onto LinkedIn Live. And in LinkedIn Live, we will be monitoring that as well. Please, on LinkedIn Live, tell us where you're all from and what's going on in your worlds and how you manage complex time and material services, including contingency labor. And if you have questions for Gurminder and Rajiv, we would love for your interaction. All right, that is enough of that. Boy, that's a lot of housekeeping. I apologize. There's exits at the rear and the entrance. So anyway, let's get started. Today's topic is managing spending compliance surrounding contingent labor services and contingent labor. It's a mouthful. This is a huge topic, and we could probably spend an entire conference talking about just this. There are conferences dedicated to this. We're going to narrow this down pretty heavily here today, but we want to talk about complex time and material related SOWs associated with how to manage the spend and how to manage the complexities and the compliances associated with that. But before we do that, let's jump over to the panel, let them introduce themselves, tell them a little bit about themselves and then what they do and who they are. So ladies first, Gurminder, how are you? Good to see you. Thank you so much for being with us today. Tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your role, your position.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to come and talk to everybody. And hello, everybody. My name is Gurminder Sandhu. I'm known as G, so if Gurminder is a mouthful, G is an easy one to remember for you guys. I'm a partner with PwC in source to pay practice. Been with PwC for 13 years, and in my role, I focus on procurement transformations and enablement. All in process technology. So technology enablement is a big part of my role for procurement. Even though with PwC for 13 years, but I started my career right out of college in procurement and loved the space so much that I've stayed here for last 23 years. So looking forward to this conversation and looking forward to interacting with you all.
Wow, 22 years at PwC. That's great.
13 at PwC, 22 in procurement.
Oh, 22 in procurement. I'm sorry. Oh, 15. So you're officially what we would call a tenured professional in the space. That's great.
Yes.
Rajiv. Hi, Rajiv. You're back. Okay, great. We just lost you for a second on the video feed. So Rajiv, Jain, if you could, thanks for coming. Really appreciate you being here as well. Tell us a little bit about yourself, about your role at PwC, and what conference room you're sitting in today. That's great video.
Yeah. So thanks, Mike. Thanks for inviting us to talk today. My name is Rajiv Jain. I'm based out of Atlanta. I'm a director at PwC, and just from a professional experience perspective, like I spent last 18 years working on procurement and supply chain, and mainly focused on operations consulting, which is all about making processes, improving processes, measuring KPIs, improving processes, implementing some of the systems, and so on. So yeah, I mean, Jain and I have been working for a long time in this area. And also within that procurement supply chain, I've focused a lot with certain industries which deal with complex services and contingent labor. And last, I think, 10 years have really focused on the services aspect because of the industries I've focused on, like power and utilities, oil and gas, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Wow, that's a huge industry, obviously always in flux, right? And a lot of moving parts there, especially with some of the new and emerging energy sectors that are there. There's a lot of companies that are pivoting and trying to do the best they can. So this is perfect. I mean, it's a great to have you as an expert in that particular industry that is always in flux. So thank you very much for coming. Really appreciate you two being here today. Let's talk a little bit around PwC. Let's talk a little bit about the services that you provide to clients associated with complex services, time material, contingency labor services, and things like that. I'll go back to Gurminder if that's okay, and then Rajiv, if you can chime in as well. Just tell us a little bit, just to kind of give us a backdrop as to what PwC does in this space. That'd be great.
Yes, and PwC, as you may all be aware of, we are a multinational professional services network of firms, network of global firms actually. And in overarching, we do audit, assurance, tax, and advisory services. What we are talking about today mainly falls into advisory services. And what Rajiv was mentioning before, we have operational consulting, technology enablement, and workforce management. So these are the ones that really, these are the kind of three categories that we focus on to enable these services. So if you look at the service management or the contingent labor, you would have PwC capabilities for various tasks, like how does this, going from as broad as like how does your contingent workforce that you're managing integrates with your strategy on the on your employee strategy, or how you are managing your overall workforce, to how you drive compliance on the services, how you are managing your tactical execution of these services, or how you're procuring or sourcing. So any complete breadth of services for enablement of complex services here.
That's a great crossroad. Anything to add to that, Rajiv? Oh, you're on mute, buddy. I'm sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I'm having some trouble with technology today, but yeah, I mean, no, these are to the point, like, don't want to add anything, but just as PwC, we do so much, right? In terms of just not services, but overall, related to M&A and everything. So I don't have to go in depth there. But yeah, we have a big focus around procurement and procurement strategy and procurement technology. I mean, automation is key at this point in the market. So yeah, that's what we focus on.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly, even after 13 years in PwC, every time I find a niche or a service or a tool that PwC has that we were not aware of. I mean, every time you raise your hand that has somebody heard of this, and we will find out that actually we have a practice that's working on this particular initiative.
Yeah, it's like the Easter egg hunt that never ends inside of large global networks, right?
Yes.
If you're lucky enough to work in a large multinational with anywhere between 25 and 250,000 people, I always say that it's like it's like Easter. Almost every day you find something new that somebody, either you knew about it or somebody just showed up and bought something, or or in this case, we're not talking necessarily about tools, but talking about relationships and complex time and material related agreements. Those always show up new almost every day, and inevitably they usually are massive. They've got multiple commas in them. So this is a huge topic. I mean, we could talk about how procurement and strategic sourcing handles contingent labor and time and materials in a number of different places. But I'd really like to focus, if that's okay, on statements of work associated with complex deliverables that have, in a lot of cases, either services that have time and materials associated with them or deliveries of products that have time and materials associated with them as well, right? I mean, Rajiv, in the pre-discussion, we were talking about things like massive construction environment projects and things like that. I kind of equate time and materials because my background is IT category management. When I was doing large ERP rollouts and things like that, they came with massive time and material engagements associated with them, right? So is this where some of the most common areas of statement of work are that carry these complex time and materials?
Mike, I just want to just set the context here, right? I mean, as you know, as you just said, services are all pervasive, right? It comes in different forms of complexity, variability, depending on the industry, right? So there's definitely a context to which industry we are talking about, right? But to your point, I mean, services and contingent labor is all across financial services, right? I mean, if you look at some of the numbers, I mean, you might be surprised that 20 to 30% of the total workforce for some of the industries like financial services is contingent labor, right? Then we get into more complex industries where 70% of the manageable spend is on services like power and utilities, right? They're all about maintenance of the lines, right? And the construction of substations and so on. And then you get into, you would be surprised, like pharma and life sciences, and you get into one segment of pre-commercial organization where 40-50% of their workforce is contingent because they're all research-based, right?
Right.
So the point I was trying to make, just to set the context of the discussion, there's definitely a flavor of the industry that we talk about, and then comes the categories, right? I mean, we can talk about 100 odd categories that actually define the services across many of these industries. But some of them that I think we should talk about throughout the discussion would be professional services, like information technology, Mike, that you were mentioning, management consulting, and then we get into the more complex one, which is engineering and research, construction, and project management, right?
Yeah.
So there's this whole gamut of the world on services, which are really a complex area to not only source but also to manage. And it's its own level of complexity as compared to really product or material procurement, right?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it's interesting. I don't know about you all, but I tend to naturally just go back to my early days of category management because for me, I like to compartmentalize things. And it's, oh, this is an IT spend, or this is a facility spend, or this is operation, research and development spend associated with pharmaceutical or something like that, right? If we're doing clinical studies or things like that, right? But at the end of the day, if you get underneath those categories of spend and you look at the engagement, it really is contingent labor, time and materials, right, Gurminder? I mean, it's if you get down below all of that, I mean, yeah, okay, an ERP rollout is an ERP rollout, and technically, I guess you'd call that an IT category spend, but you're paying for professional services, right? So I mean, is that pretty accurate in your opinion, Gurminder?
Yeah, the scope and once you really start analyzing what is a scope in these services, or what does the scope, I mean, even on the topic, it's so huge. I mean, pre-pandemic days, right? Pre-pandemic, they were like, I think around 40 to 50% was contingent workforce in some of the industries. But now as we go post-pandemic, just to reduce the cost, there was a Gartner survey which said about 32% of the organizations are replacing their full-time employees with contingent workforce. And then, as Rajiv mentioned, you look at these industries which are so heavy on complex services. And when you combine these two, there isn't an industry, a geography, or a region which is untouched with these services.
Right.
Or these kind of services. And when you continue, I mean, when you look at these complex services, it's not just about the services, but regulatory compliance comes into place. How you are managing onboarding and offboarding, so that really relates to your HR and your brings in that part of the organization. How you're managing this spend. Then, I mean, when you start looking at all the pieces that have to go into these services, the scope is really really large and touches almost every industry and every geography.
Yeah, it's funny. You're interviewing yourself. My next question was literally to kind of give me a scope of the sense of the market and how big this is. And stats like 40 to 50% of is contingent labor, right? And I think that kind of the market and where corporations are going, especially with COVID and pandemic, it's not slowing down. It's getting, if anything, it's getting bigger.
It's bigger, yeah.
And it's a shift. I wouldn't say it's a shift. It's just a continued evolution of the business model in which these companies tend to operate, right? Like Rajiv said, many of the large pharmaceuticals, they're research and development firms. They're not manufacturing and clinical studies and trial testing, right? So they have to go out to these highly complex statements of work that include massive amounts of time and materials and things like that. So thank you for kind of giving us a scope. Great to get some numbers. I want to ask the audience really quickly, now that we've started to kind of wrap our heads around this a little bit. And I do this a lot. There is a polling functionality inside of Zoom. I never use it. I always love to go freestyle. If the audience, both inside of the room and the audience on LinkedIn who's watching right now, here's what I'd like you to do. Just reply inside of the chat or reply inside of the feed inside of LinkedIn. On a scale of 1 to 5, how mature and how well do you think your organization is currently managing the complexities associated with contingent labor from a cost perspective, from a compliance perspective, associated with all the different things that we're talking about, regardless of category of spend? I'm just interested to hear how you do it. 1 being, oh my God, we just sign it and then it goes into the abyss and we don't really manage it, right? And 5 being, I think before the call, I mentioned your Yoda, you proactively manage these relationships, you're the marriage counselor between the stakeholder and the supplier workforce, and you have everything monitored so that you don't have both at tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, and you feel like you've got everything under control. So as we continue the conversation, I'm going to monitor a little bit of that and come back and talk a little bit where I see everybody at. Thank you very much, by the way. I see everybody starting to jump in and put in their numbers. So let's talk a little bit about, a quick question for you around the market, Rajiv and Gurminder. I understand, I'm interested to know, is there a what's the word I want to use? Is there a method to this madness? Is there an industry? I mean, Rajiv started to talk a little bit about the energy sector, and the energy sector is really, really heavy in this space. Is there a geography? Is there a size of a company? Do some organizations, the large organizations, tend to do this more? I'm seeing the emergence of this in small startups where they just can't staff fast enough and they're going to third-party contracts. They're outsourcing all of their marketing. They're outsourcing all of their sales. They're outsourcing the M&A and the build out, right? Because especially in the light industrial, durable and non-durable goods, as startups now, they just can't seem to get it. Is there a place, is there a hot spot, is there a bed where this takes place more than others? And I'll ask Rajiv first.
Yeah, I think the first thing, Mike, I would say that, most companies have a specific businesses, right? The businesses require certain things from procurement, like services or material, right? So the industries I talked about by nature deal themselves to be more service heavy, right? But the second thing, I think what we definitely have to talk about is just the global workforce supply chain, right? And a lot is driven out of that particular fact as well. So if you look at just the contingent market and the, what people are looking at, I mean, people want to have flexible work arrangements, right? And they're okay with it because it gives them a sense of flexibility. Like even at PwC, we seeing in the last couple of years, the pool of resources that we can tap in has drastically become better in quality, right? So to answer your question, Mike, I think most because of how the supply chain is changing around, people and workforce, and the companies are also adapting to it and seeing real value in not only tapping great resources for niche category of works, but also, just focus on cost management.
Yeah.
So I think those are the two perspectives: the industry perspective, the service heavy, and even some industries that are not. no tapping into the contingent labor. And again, I think one thing also, one last thing is, this is such a interesting and complex topic that, I think Tony was mentioning something on the chat, whether he's saying, hey, professional services, but if you look at the subcategories in professional services, they're all different. So I think that's a great point to make, that at a high level, and you have to go to the next level to really start differentiating what's happening from SOW standpoint, contingent labor standpoint, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I come from a place, I've been doing this about 20 years, and I know we all have some experience in this. I remember when professional services wasn't even in my category roadmap, and now it's so big, it actually has its own category, right?
Yeah, it was not even a managed spend category. So in
Nope.
professional services, people
Didn't exist.
You can buy anything. You get $600 an hour or whatever. And now the managed category, where we are really having cost pressures to go down on the rate cards and everything. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I never would have imagined, even probably 5 years ago, that professional services category management is a niche within strategic sourcing and procurement, right? But
Yeah.
I mean, we're seeing that. I'm seeing that more and more in the marketplace, and it is a heavily sought after a set of skills, right? Gurminder, you're seeing that and the interesting part about it is okay, yeah, if you're lucky enough to actually have this designation in this carve out, and you've got a subject matter expert, even with the subject matter expert, you're still going to the PwCs of the world to help guide you on your journey, right? I mean, just having somebody to be able to fly the flag is the start, but then they need the support mechanisms behind them. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that is true. And there is various reasons you are needing that support mechanism, right? Whether that is to provide insight or do the benchmarking on professional services. You are a category manager of that. Now you want to go out and hire or do some big projects that would require those kind of services. PwC can not only provide the services, but also help you negotiate better with those services as well. So we come in from very many different angles to support that category. And as you guys were discussing, I was thinking, when you think of service, right, where there is a need, there is a service. And variability of those services is so great, like Rajiv was mentioning, by the industry. Even like a professional services for a small corporation might mean something very different, or might have subcategorization which is limited, versus a big professional, a big organization which might have every company in the world providing that professional services. So how you are going to segregate those services, how you're going to negotiate and benchmark those services is something that we definitely help out the clients with or provide perspective on.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm reading through some of the chat as well. I know Rajiv is as well, and I'm also trying to keep track on LinkedIn. We've got about 25 or 30 people on LinkedIn, and we've got about 45 people in the room. So we've got 2 active conversations, but they can't see each other. Really interesting, because they get a lot of alignment together. Question for you. I want to just ask one more question, and then I want to jump into the nitty gritty. I want to really start to strip away the shell on this. This gets, and we talked about this, we touched on it really, really quickly. The complexity of just level 1, which is, okay, I've got a client, I've got a partner. I've got an internal client that has a need. I've gone out to the marketplace. I've looked at who the providers are in that space. There is a time and materials professional services engagement here. I've been diving a lot into government contracting lately with the emergence of Clubhouse, because it seems to be all anyone wants to talk about on Clubhouse is government contracting. And what's amazing to me is the subcontracting of tier 2 and tier 3 vendors in government contracting, right? And I'm wondering about your experience from a complexity perspective associated with that in the non-governmental space. How much of that are you seeing in, hey, I've got a partnership with somebody who's going to provide me these materials, but then I got to worry about their tier 3, and is that, how much of it is there, and where is it going, and how much more complexity does it add to that? Rajiv, I'll let you jump in because I see
Yeah.
you nodding your head heavily on that.
Yeah, this is a topic which is very kind of close to me because the last couple of years I've been dealing with clients who are talking of this tier 1, tier 2, right? So let's just put that in a quick context, right? From a material side, on the product side, we've always talked about end-tier supply chain, right? And there comes this whole idea of material traceability, right? Where's the material, where it's going, what product's going, and so on and so forth. Like on the services, I think what we are seeing is, and what exactly we talked about, contingent labor. Everybody wants to use that contingent labor. So when I, as a client, use another firm to render services to me, you can be rest assured that they are using subcontractors as well. In fact, if you see, most of the contracts have a subcontracting clause, which again depends on the industry based on compliance, what they're putting in. So I think, again, the regulated industries, you're talking government, regulated industries, and commercial. So I think there's definitely a lot of discussion with clients that how can I know more about my tier 2 and tier 3 vendors that are supporting me in the completion of the statement of work. And part of it is also, you might think, hey, as a client, why should I care? I have a master service agreement with my prime vendor. But I think there's a lot of things happening in the condition we are, or the geopolitical condition we are in, that from a compliance standpoint, from a risk standpoint, we want to know which subcontractor is coming to my premises. Have they signed the NDA? Have they been certified? So to Mike, to your point, I think that definitely is a challenge, both from a contracting standpoint, the execution of the contract standpoint, to really keep tab of this tier 2 and tier 3 subcontractors.
Yeah. I'm interested in, there's a comment that says, a lot of the professional service firms are ripping off clients. And that's interesting because that's the general mindset of procurement that's out there. And thanks, Tony, for that. I appreciate that. Right. We're going to talk a little bit more in the next segment of this around how to protect yourself against that, how to make sure that you manage costs against that, right? Yeah. And how to manage compliance against that. But this is a real nugget, and I really, really like this. I want to ask Gurminder, because you hit on something, and I wrote it down, and it happens every single time I do this. There's an amazing knowledge nugget that happens here, and Rajiv, I think you just hit on it, which is the amount of effort that's taking place in supply chain associated with physical goods and services, associated with traceability, right? There's an industry developing around traceability of materials and services and manufacturing inside a supply chain. However, that same issue is true of transient labor and time and material statements of work associated with professional services. It seems to me, and Gurminder, tell me if I'm wrong, there's a massive gap right now between what's happening in the supply chain side and what's happening in the professional services side associated with the effort of traceability as professional services firms move into tier 2 and tier 3 sub-providers, subcontractors for some of the services that they provide. Is that accurate?
Yes, that is definitely accurate. I mean, like on the supply chain side, like Rajiv was mentioning, we are tracking all of the way. But if you look at many clients today, even though they are hiring professional services, but do they really have that traceability of every person who's coming on? I mean, I'll divide that into multiple, like first professional services, like for example, PwC, we are on a fixed fee contract with something. Yep. Are really clients tracking us down, or are they tracking compliance for NDAs, or tracking compliance on system access and all of that level that they can say that, okay, when did we onboard a resource? When did we offboard a resource, right? That kind of, we are seeing at some clients, but others we are just bringing in, I mean, even in ourselves, we are bringing in resources on the projects on and off, but are the clients able to keep track of that? They are doing in many industries now, in order to get system access, in order to get asset like a laptop or anything issued, that they are using the technology to do the onboard and offboard process, but still not very prevalent to that level. So, and to what Rajiv said before, that they are trying to get more, like for government contracts, for example, especially for defense, right? You have flow down flow downs, which have to go to, no matter whether that's a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, whichever subcontractor, it needs to flow down to everybody. So they have to adhere to the same terms. They have to adhere to the same compliance and regulatory requirements. I don't think in commercial side that has been that stringent yet, but we are definitely seeing the progress towards that. Now, even when we go, we have to declare that who are going to be our subcontractors and make sure that those subcontractors are complying to the same liabilities, are complying to the same terms that we are subjected to, being the main stakeholders or being the main contract holders.
So Rajiv, question for you: flow downs of compliance through government contracting and how they've structured the contractor subcontractor methodology. Is this something that we can actually learn from governmental sourcing to the commercial? I listen, there's a lot of people out there that say governmental sourcing is broken in many ways. Is this one thing that we can look at the government and go, hey, you got this right, the commercial people need to actually follow suit?
I think, Mike, anytime we are talking of compliance, right, and the processes that we set up to manage those compliance, I think we need to look at the operational cost. I think if you look at government contract, the total cost of developing a full-blown contract, I would think is at least 4 to 5 times a commercial contract. Again, we have categories, right? But I think you get the point. So I think that most commercial companies are struggling to strike the balance between what they have to do, right? Like flow downs and compliance measures and signing all these contracts to the end tier versus what else they can do on the analytics side, where you really have to, what is that I need to know about my subcontractor? So to your point about can we learn? Yeah, of course we can learn, but I think the commercial side, we just have to strike that balance that what do we need and how much do we want to take on? Otherwise, it just increases the total cost of, I would say a single contract, right? If we go to that aspect of operational effectiveness and process steps.
Right. I mean, at what point is the total cost of the rate of return on the investment is the big question, right? And also you got to worry about, okay, I don't want to get stuck up in the bureaucracy of the moment and not actually start my project because I'm spending 3.5 years in contract mode. So, and by then we've decided to scrub the idea, and we're not even going to build out in Dallas anymore. We've decided to abandon that. We spent 2 years developing a contract associated with the build out of the facility, and then by the time it got to the contract, we decided, forget it. We're not even going to do it anymore. So, I've been in that paralysis before in a past life. So go ahead.
Just want to quickly add, I think, but to answer, like, let's find a solution, right? What we are looking at in the market. I think what we are looking in the market is, that companies are moving towards the technology platforms, right? That provide inherent tracking capabilities, quick onboarding and offboarding capabilities of not only the prime, but also the subcontract. So I think the commercial side is really tapping into the technology side. Other than government, I mean, let's not even talk about government as a different altogether. So that's the way we are looking at that. People are looking at technology to track that and solve that issue.
So all right, listen, great backdrop, first 30 minutes. I love the fact that we've been chewing on this already. We've got some people talking about change and how to manage change associated with. There's somebody on LinkedIn talking about the fact that everything is fine, don't upset the apple cart. How do we attach that? And this is one of the things I want to talk about in the next segment, which is now that we've kind of gotten past the market, and now that we've talked a little bit about what is and what this isn't, let's talk about spend management and compliance. I mean, we already started to dip our toe into the compliance conversation already. So, I mean, these are really, really complex things, but at the end of the day, a lot of things that go well follow a pretty standard process in order to get you to success, right? So let's talk a little bit about how you, what you see and how you drive your clients to create a process through at least the I mean, you've got the analysis phase, you've got the market search phase, you've got the contracting and commercials phase, and then eventually we get to onboard, eventually to proactive management and maintenance mode, right, of these relationships. So let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, yes, it's an extremely complex thing, but the process is pretty similar to a lot of places, right? I mean, if you get the process right, you're lining yourself up for success. Is that right, Gurminder?
That's true. And the process, that's one thing we always say is that for procuring services, whether those are small services or they are complex contracts, what we have been talking about, those services, the process is kind of same. The rigor of the process, the requirements at each step may maybe different just because of the complexity. For example, every process starts with a need, right? So you identify a requirement and you do the analysis on the requirement. Now, if it's a smaller requirement, you might just take that requirement, just get some ideas on it and start with a quick RFQ process or a quick code process and go forward with it. Whereas for complex services, you're first doing, okay, what do we really need? What's the scope of this? We are analyzing it. What is the market benchmarks right now? Even we have seen clients who are going for ERP implementations today are looking at some of the benchmarks, how quickly I can do it. What are my various options out there, cloud versus on-prem? How do I do it? So these kind of analysis. And then you're going through your sourcing process. That's standard again. You're doing your sourcing and going to the contracting before you start with the execution. So what we are really driving people to, and when you look at services, I think the most important part, and this goes back to usage of any technology also. What we see is that many clients have identified a business case, right? They've identified that these are our savings that we are going to go through if we have sourced this or we are managing this service. But what they really forget is that there is no one size fits all for services. Even though the high level process is same, you need to make sure that each service is categorized and what you're tracking to it, how you're sourcing it, how you're going to manage it and execute it is well defined in sort of like a services framework. So, for example, if we are doing a service that's actually going to end up being a fixed fee service, do I really need to spend a lot of time in negotiating rates per hour kind of thing, or should I focus more on that deliverables or the outcomes of that fixed fee? And then also looking at on the other side, if I have a complex time and material service, what are the KPIs? How am I tracking? What are the different parts of that services, what we are going to track? So like I said, the process has to be there. You need to use some sort of a services, what we call very broadly as a framework to understand how to start this process and where does it end and what are the requirements at each step of on the way.
Rajiv, let's talk about cost for a minute. Benchmarking, right? I mean, the key to success in this thing has to be benchmarking in some way, shape, or form. Is that correct?
So Mike, yeah, just from a sourcing standpoint, right? Setting up the MSA, the rates, yeah, I totally agree. I mean, benchmarking is critical, right? Like, for example, I'll just give you one example and then I'll move on. But I think the point I'm trying to make is from a services standpoint, benchmarking is extremely important from a sourcing standpoint. But, the real thing is that, you set up the contract, right, on a benchmark price index or whatever it is. But with services, the key is, are you really realizing savings? On the material side, there's a direct relationship, more or less, to the benchmark price, what's set up in the contract to what has been actually spent, right? But I think on the contracts, on the services side, there's always this total mismatch between what is the opportunity or the cost saving that has been forecasted or put in the contract versus what has been realized. So yes, I mean, benchmark is extremely important. There's no doubt about it. And on the services side, it's typically complex because you're talking of blended rates, class types, and all that, especially with complex services. So yeah.
I want to go to the questions really quickly because I was just reading through them. One of them is from Brian. It says, I know the labor cost laws are different in Mexico, but do you see Are you hearing anything changing there to incorporate contingent labor as part of company strategies? And I don't know if you have that in the repertoire or not.
So Mike, I will defer
Oh,
that
Rajiv,
question.
I lost your audio.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yeah, absolutely.
I have some technology problems today, some
It's
internet.
okay.
I'm
It's
sorry
okay.
about that. But yeah, so Mike, I will defer that question. I mean, we are talking about workforce management around, and
Right.
my whole experience is mainly North America. So
Yeah.
the Mexico and LATAM is very different in terms of how they're adopting because of labor laws. But I wouldn't be the expert to answer that question. But that again brings a very important point. I think even in the US, there's a lot happening around how do we manage independent workers versus contingent workers, right? W-2 versus people that own the company. The
Yeah,
tax laws are
absolutely.
different, the labor laws are different. But I think it's more simplified in the US to really it gets adoption around contingent labor.
And data privacy also is different based on the class of contingent labor that you're getting. When you're getting individuals, the data privacy laws are much more stricter on protecting that information than they might be on the other side. But on the labor class, I mean, definitely happy to connect you to folks who really focus on that. That's the thing about with such kind of firm that whenever we go, we have these kind of questions, we have experts that we bring into those conversations to provide insights on those.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think the takeaway from that is, hey, listen, every country is different when it comes to labor and how they manage that from a contractual perspective. Both your direct labor, your indirect labor, and your contracted labor are completely different animals in every arena. So you're going to need, I think it's a two-plied answer. One is you need to find somebody who's got regionalized subject matter expertise, which I'm sure is somewhere in the arsenal, and I'm sure Gurminder can help you navigate through that, or Rajiv can help you navigate through that. Somewhere within the arsenal of PwC, I'm sure there's somebody that can help. But at the same time, you also need to get the positioning and the strategy of your own corporation, right? A lot of corporations, a lot of chief financial officers grapple with contingency labor and where it is on the balance sheet and how they want to effectively manage that based on their own policies and procedures. So highly complicated item. I want to go back to relationships for a minute, because we talked a little bit about, and Rajiv, you talked a little bit about cost and benchmarking and grinding down and getting into the tables and talking about how much the individuals are costing as far as billable hourly rates and things like that. I think that people get a little bit way too far in the weeds on that. You have to come back out a little bit and say, okay, I've got a budget for the project, and if I want to spend a little bit of money on project management versus sole contributor, okay, but look at it holistically as well as individualistic, right? But what's really interesting to me is, and you talked about this, is the burn rates and things like that. I want to talk about the relationship for a second. How important is the relationship? Because from a procurement and sourcing perspective, we're not buying anything. We don't have procurement. I don't know a strategic sourcing organization that has a need for a $50 million complex time and materials agreement for a build out in another geography. We just kind of sit back and these things come to us. So from a management perspective, associated relationship, how important is the relationship between your stakeholder and your vendor population, and constantly being able to monitor that relationship, where you are, what the terms and conditions are, so that you don't set it and forget it. And then all of a sudden you got a relationship manager that shows up and goes, hey, I'm 90% of the budget and we're only 10% complete against the project.
Yeah, so I think, Mike, the key thing is, especially again on the services side, right, there has to be a pretty close tie between the sourcing and procurement organization, the business unit, and the supplier. And the reason I say that, we have seen a lot of examples where sourcing had done a great job with a supplier that I think is doing services contract for, say, annually 100 million, right? But then when it comes to the business unit and taking on the services from the suppliers, they're not adhering to the rate cards that have been established, or not every contract is going to the preferred supplier, right? So that's one angle to it. So when we are looking at our procurement category strategy for services, a pretty close tie between the organization and the business unit they're serving. Now, when it comes to the second half, I mean, we can talk all day about it, but I think the second point that I want to make is that once your category strategy is set, your contract is in, I think even to write project-based service statement of work, right? You will see that there might be high dollar value, and hence sourcing and has to be involved, even though they have the MSA and all that. So again, they have to work very closely between sourcing and business unit to really manage the SLA of how fast the contract to be done, how efficient it is. And the last thing is just the suppliers. And we want to relate it to the material world, where the whole idea about how we interact with the supplier is very disconnected. It's about the receivement of goods. I mean, it's still connected, but the point I'm trying to that it is not that frequent in terms of such a close connection on services side. If I'm putting up a construction project, right, you're almost the sourcing part of it, or not the sourcing, sorry, the contract management part of it is almost like project management. They are milestones. They're looking at how much they have done, how many poles they have put in the ground, and billing you every week or 2 weeks. So the level of connection with the suppliers to the contract management process is pretty high touch, and hence you need to have that great relationship in terms of contract managing the compliance around it. So I mean that I think is a recipe of success when we set up contracts and manage their contracts throughout the life cycle.
So it sounds to me, Gurminder, what Rajiv is saying is that it's a blend of contract management and vendor management that positions people for success. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's definitely accurate. And as you are going through, I mean, when you look at the services procurement now, how it has changed in many years, I think what we really need for success is those KPIs, those interaction with the suppliers, like upfront setting up those performance metrics that we are going to measure. It's not that the contracting is done. Supplier, you delivered the services. At the end of the services, we are going to come back and say whether we like it or we don't like it. It's now a more integrated model, and services are also becoming a lot more outcome based, right? It's not just getting something done in the service, but what is the end goal? What is the value, like Rajiv put it, what is the value you're going to get out of the service? So even in complex services nowadays, we are seeing, like, I'll give you another, going back to the technology example, you have an implementation of a software tool. Implementation is not the goal of the service. Getting the results, the benefits, the outcome is the goal of that service, right? So the contracting and the management of that contracts, or the KPIs that are established there, have to be outcome based. They should not be just about an end result or a technology getting there. So these are the kind of, like, even now the sourcing managers or the category sourcing folks, as well as the stakeholders, have started thinking through that process, that how do we make it more outcome based? What are those KPIs that will drive the success?
I wish we had 2 hours. I really do. And the reason why is because you just opened up a whole nother set of questioning that I have around outcome-based contracting, and whether or not vendors are actually starting to take gain share models against large enterprise class, complex time and material engagements, services engagements, because at some point there was a business case that said, if we do this, we will save X and we will enhance our operating, or will enhance our operating operations, right? So there is some value perception associated with doing the project, or why do the project at all. I've often asked the question of, okay, at what point does somebody want to create a gain share model? I mean, it came out of accounts payable, you know what I mean? I don't know if at some point in time somebody comes in and goes, okay, listen, we're an SAP integrator, or we're a general contractor that helps people build out locations. And if you do this, and your labor force goes down by 20% because you moved from downtown Chicago to Dallas, once this is done, we want 10% of the cost savings. And I'm not asking you to chime in on that. I just think it's really interesting, and we could spend a whole nother day on that. I love the fact that you went to performance metrics. I'm going to jump into stacking the odds for success. One of the things that we talked about, and one of the things you just dropped, was if you're going to have success in this, you're going to have performance-based metrics. You're going to have great relationships, like Rajiv said. You're going to proactively manage these. You're going to do your benchmarking, but you got to stay a little bit flexible, because depending upon what the business need and the outcome is, you probably might need to spend a little bit more in different areas. But you have to also have the rigor of the contracting process in place. So great nuggets there on how to potentially give yourself some success. I want to get to some questions, because we've got about a half a dozen questions. I don't think we're going to get to them all. I think we're going to have to continue this in the LinkedIn or in another private session, maybe on Clubhouse or something like that. One of the questions says, one of the biggest challenges in managing contingent labor is in the capabilities of the MSP and other software platforms. What do you see disrupting in the marketplace as far as tools and technology? I definitely want to know your answer on that. Rajiv, you first, please.
Yeah, I think so. So the MSP world has been there for quite some time, right? I mean, we have seen MSPs involved into handling contingent labor. But I think just from a technology standpoint, and as I was talking about the labor pool, right, the changing market dynamics about having contingent labor, the market dynamics about these tools managing a lot of compliance and onboarding. I mean, so the tools have got more sophisticated. The tools are getting more better in terms of managing a lot of work to gather the right resource, and then comes the MSP doing that. So I think we've seen a bit of improvement in terms of what we want to get out of MSPs, but I think we still have a long way to go. But but I've seen that trend where we're getting more benefits about having an MSP overall. But I think tools and technologies have definitely helped in that area and the labor pool.
Gurminder, any thoughts?
No, I think Rajiv did that, but on the specific technologies, I mean, like, at least I'll speak from my experience, like Freeglass is out there, Beeline is out there, all of these. But I think along with having the technologies to manage that onboarding, offboarding, and the services part, it's important that your process is integrated kind of throughout, right? You set up some level of SLAs or set those terms in your contracts, but the value that you are going to get out of it will be that how you are tracking to them. So do you have, I'll give you example, like we were working with one of the clients that their whole premises of business case was that we are going to get contract compliance, and our savings are going to get because we will have a rate compliance or contract compliance. But when we really started looking at their contracts were very subjective. There was nothing that was trackable in those. And that's where you will get the value, right? If your transactions or a downstream process is not able to capture what savings you had projected or what things you are projecting in your contract, then it's of no use. So your technology has to be such that it can integrate that process all the way from sourcing what you are projecting as sourcing savings to contract what you are really contracting on, and have some of those executable terms that you can really tangibly say that this is what we are saving down in the transactions.
So nugget alert again, subjective terms inside of your commercial agreements is a slippery slope, right? And make sure that you try to stay away from subjective as much as possible, quantitative as much as possible, right? Great. Lots more questions. I want to try and get to a couple more of these, so let's rapidly go through them. How do you see the gig economy changing engagements with contingent workers?
Well, I mean, we just talked about it, right? I mean, that is what's happening with the labor pool. I mean, the whole idea about having a desk job and having a permanent job is no more a security or a sense of joy. I mean, the gig economy, the labor force wants to be mobile, like wants to take more different kind of engagements. The connectivity, right? The global connectivity. Now, I mean, you can get now a particular resource just anywhere in the world, right? There are a lot of platforms that do that. I mean, they're connecting the whole world, from a resource standpoint. So I think that is a definite big shift or a big push towards, what we're trying to talk about here.
All right, great one here. In terms of infrastructure, what functional area is best served to effectively manage, monitor, and oversee contractual agreements related to contingent labor, professional services, et cetera? I'm guessing, go ahead.
You mean like infrastructure as a category?
Yeah, I think they're talking about infrastructure build out, physical, building, facilities management, things of that nature. I'm going to go with that.
Oh, well, I mean that can mean a lot, but I think if we are talking of IT infrastructure, I think I've seen a lot of strategy work being pushed towards getting these subject matter experts around from a contingent labor standpoint. But I think if you're talking about infrastructure as in setup of substations and all, I don't think that's a contingent labor category. I think you still have project specific big SOWs with huge liability clause, and you need to do all that. So I think it depends on what we're talking about.
Okay. I'm gonna wrap. We got 2 minutes left to go. Thank you, by the way, so much for your time today. I knew we could spend 3 hours talking about this, just the three of us alone. I'd love to try and figure out a way to have you all back for another session, and maybe we dive a little bit deeper. Let's do this. I always love to wrap up our events with this, and I'll start with ladies first. So Gurminder, we talked about a lot of stuff today. If there's one thing that the audience, both here in Zoom as well as out on LinkedIn Live, and the people are going to watch this in the future on LinkedIn Live, what's the one thing that you can give them as a takeaway to help position them for success in this market?
If it's just one thing, I'll say that execution management of the contracts for services is as important as negotiating and spending the upfront work. We see a lot of clients who are really good at negotiating. They're really good at making sure that all of things is there, but then when it goes to really executing, that's not the strong point. So execution needs that much focus. And today, I think in services, that's where we lack. That's why we cannot track everything or the spend, because we lack on the execution management side. So that's really, really key.
Amazing. So in other words, if I can paraphrase that a little bit, the job just starts when the contract ends, right? And
Yes.
Ongoing management, execution, compliance, and ongoing support of that agreement and the relationship is key to success.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Rajiv, what do you got after she just dropped that bomb? What's your one takeaway that people can have? Oh, I think he's a little bit hung up.
Yeah, he was having
with what's going on, right? But yeah, I'm back. So, Tony, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Go ahead.
All right, good. I think that they focused on value-based pricing, outcome-based contracting. I think that is what the focus should be. It's easier said than done because there are a lot of ifs and buts. Who owns it? What? How are we going to measure it? But I think most sourcing and contracting professional, if they want to focus on that, that's what I would do from a services standpoint.
Value-based pricing, outsource-based agreement.
Outcome-based. Outcome.
I'm sorry.
Different words, but I think at the end, it is about what we want to achieve rather than who is doing it and how is doing it. That's also important, but the end result is the outcome.
Yeah, I actually did write down outcome. I just said it right.
Now it's fine.
All right. Great. Listen, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. I know how valuable your time is. Thank you to the audience today. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to drop them in on LinkedIn. We'll be tagging Gurminder and Rajiv in the post on LinkedIn as well, so that they can see the commentary. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to track them down. We also have ongoing relationships with PwC, so thank you so much for your continued support of Procurement Foundry. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to the next time we can talk to you about this amazing topic and this massive amount of spend inside of our organizations. Thanks so much. Enjoy your day, and we really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thanks for having, and I would love to talk to you about gain sharing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm going to get you two on another panel. Absolutely. No question about it.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Have a great day. And that's it. Happy Tuesday.